Hello and welcome to Dream Cinema. This month I am pleased to welcome Rhohini Walker to the show. Rhohini is an Indian-born British writer and poet who's been living in a rural corner of the California high desert for the past 8 years. As well as being co-creator of the print periodical Arcana, Rhohini also works one-on-one with people as a teacher and mentor, exploring the intersection of inner-decolonization and indigenity through the lenses of inner alchemy, myth, and nature. She has recently unveiled Root and Rise, an online teaching and mentoring membership space which will be focusing on these topics. Root and Rise begins on December 1st, 2021. You can find out more about Rhohini's work at rohiniwalker.com. Rhohini and I will be exploring the short film The Field and the Knower, and we invite you to watch the short film prior to listening to our conversation. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you there. Rhohini, welcome to Dream Cinema. It's a pleasure to have you.
Hi, JD. Thank you for asking me to participate.
Wonderful. And the thing about this that I don't know if I consciously did when thinking about you as a co-host was the film that we're going to be looking at of mine, The Field and the Knower. The title is taken from the Bhagavad Gita. And you were born in India. And so it's just perfect. And I didn't consciously really even think about that. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to read a short passage from the Bhagavad Gita.
Mm-hmm.
So this is from chapter 2. And it's when Arjuna and Krishna, of course, are having a conversation. And then Krishna starts to tell Arjuna about the best way to be an enlightened being, I guess you could say. I don't know if you would term it that way, but he's giving him answers on how to exist in the world. And he says, they live in wisdom who see themselves in all and all in them, who have renounced every selfish desire and sense craving tormenting the heart. Neither agitated by grief nor hankering after pleasure, they live free from lust and fear and anger. Established in meditation, they are truly wise. Fettered no more by selfish attachments, they are neither elated by good fortune nor depressed by bad. Such are the seers. And then I'm going to skip toward the end of the chapter and read the last little paragraph. They are forever free who renounce all selfish desires and break away from the ego cage of I, me, and mine to be united with the Lord. This is the supreme state, attain to this and pass from death to immortality. So that's chapter 2, a part of chapter 2 from the Bhagavad Gita. And what I'm curious about is your Indian culture and your heritage, and what maybe your family was. Your family religious? Did you read this book as a child or other Indian books? And how long did you live in India before you moved?
So yeah, my family are not religious at all. So they were that. So there was never any kind of we didn't live within any kind of like confines of protocol of this or that. But at the same time, there's I come from a family where culturally, even though they were not religious in like an overt way, they were culturally very kind of tapped into not so much traditions, but to history, I guess. Both sides of my mum and my dad, both their families come from very sort of academic backgrounds, so it was very tapped into sort of history of not only India but other places. So there was always conversation going on around sort of culture and history, and so within that context, I read as a child a lot of Indian mythology. So outside of a kind of religious context, but more within the kind of cultural context.
As literature, almost as literature.
Yeah, Yeah, and like mythology, you know, just like children's books on mythology, and so that was like kind of my earliest introduction into the world of myth and story, which I'm like very much immersed in now. But I was, you know, just completely taken with, and there would be like, you know, children's books, pictures of all of the different gods and goddesses and all of their adventures. So you know, so I remember having remember having a children's book of the Mahabharata, from where the Bhagavad Gita is taken. So within that context, I was exposed to sort of Indian gods and deities, of which there are so many. And then and we moved to London when I was 10, 9 or 10. Yeah. So I spent the first sort of decade,
formative,
just over a decade of my life in India. Yeah.
So obviously the culture, it's not like you were 1 or 2 years old. You spent a decade there, the first 10 years of your life. So that obviously must resonate with you in some way, or be part of what draws you to mythology and to the work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that really put like that planted a very early seed. And then, you know, when I moved to London, there was all of the, you know, I was young, you're in that very sort of impressionable age, and I was trying to fit in, and, you know, brand new place, brand new culture to fit into. So kind of all of those strange interests in these strange things were just kind of ushered away, and I didn't really sort of revisit until later on, you know, until I finished my undergraduate, and then I did a master's, and sort of kind of dived back into those topics later on, but then, you know, but didn't sort of didn't pursue them beyond academia. And then when I, you know, finished my master's and, you know, just started working, because people were like, well, what are you going to do with myth, and what are you going to do with story, and you will just, you know, get a job and all this kind of stuff. And I just wanted to, you know, get on with my life, and it was in my early 20s. So it's not since coming to the desert and just really allowing myself to just really fall into this environment, which is such a mythic environment in itself, and so where, you know, I was just really able to indulge in my love of like symbols and metaphors, and speaking to unseen entities.
I'm curious as to how you intersect science, literature, academia, and mythology. But I want to get to that maybe a little bit later. My brother gave me this copy, I don't know, probably 20 years ago, of the Gita. And
yeah, it looks like a well-worn copy.
What's that?
That looks like a well-worn copy, as it should be.
Well, he drew the cover. He drew over the
Amazing.
top. This is the original.
Oh, wow.
He made this cover for it, and it sat on my shelf for like, I don't know, years, until I finally started looking at it and realizing that the story was something that for some reason really resonated with me. The language, the way it's told, the ideas, and it just became a part of me. I would read it quite often for stretches of time. And then I love chapter 13's title, The Field and the Knower. And so when I made this short film, actually, the field near where I was living at the time caught on fire. And I don't know how many acres, maybe 50 acres burned in that area. And it was just charred and desolate and ashy. And I thought, oh my God, I have to shoot something out there. I have to film something out there. And then that's when the story sort of emerged. And then it felt like the concepts I was talking about sort of reflected a lot of the concepts in the Gita, and especially even that chapter. So even though I mostly focus on chapter 2, chapter 13 seems to make sense with this story. So maybe for now we can move into some of these questions and then see where it takes us.
So that was actually going to be my first question, which was like, can you talk about how the essence of the film dovetails with the name, The Field and the Knower, from the Bhagavad Gita? So I guess you kind of touched upon that, but if you wanted to go any deeper with that, and especially like it's interesting what you said, that it was the field had caught on fire, because when I was watching it, it was very much this scorched earth battlefield sense. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean it merges with some sort of Americana thing too for me somehow. Like the outfit that I'm wearing harkens back to maybe 1800s or something like that. That's the feeling I get. I feel like maybe automobiles don't exist in that world yet, and so I don't know why I did that. Maybe it provides a sort of timeless feel to it. Um, when the horse enters, it also gives it even more of that feeling, as if maybe this is how people are transported. Um, and we were filming it out there, and there's a bike path near where we were filming. And I had to cut a bunch of the material because bikes would occasionally float through this
Yeah.
1800 scene. But yeah, I'm not a scholar by any means in terms of the Gita. I've studied it quite a bit. Eknath Iswaran, who is the translator of this particular version, um, has really wonderful preludes to each chapter, and he sort of describes the Indian concepts. Prakriti, I'm probably butchering all of the names of these things, but all of the Hindu concepts that kind of circulate, as far as I can tell, throughout various forms of the religion. And so it feels good to be able to have a little bit of a background through Eknath Iswaran's words and then enter it. But sometimes I don't like to get the academic version. I just want to dive right in, see how it feels, and then experience it.
Yeah. What you're just talking about made me think about, putting it within that kind of American historical context. And I mean, I guess this is going a little bit more into the themes of the film, of the protagonist dragging these people around, these captives around, in this kind of like really, like he's compelled to do that and he can't let them go. So it's interesting you saying you're putting it within this kind of American historical context, because I guess within the wider world of what's going on in America right now, there's these kind of these sort of albatrosses that people have been dragging around, these kind of ancestral, albatrosses that they haven't been able to let go of, that they've been dragging around, that kind of need to be resolved and released in some way. So just when you were talking about, I mean, this isn't in my list of questions, but when you were talking about framing the film within the kind of, American historical setting, it made me think about that, some things that are happening now where people are having to look at the history of the ancestry here, and those kinds of parts that have been dragged around without, just aggressively pulled and dragged around without really being engaged with.
Yeah, well, it feels sort of like Civil War time to me a little bit for some reason. I don't know if I intentionally. It was sort of a feeling I had to put it in a context before automobiles and maybe in that era, but I didn't specifically set out to address cultural issues per se. It was more something like a universal truth that I was headed toward.
Yeah.
Because the Gita to me seems to address universal truths that can be applied to all of us about the inner life, that will maybe help us work within whatever context we find ourselves, whatever threat or whatever patriarchy or system that is oppressive. And so I was kind of doing a little more universal approach. But I think,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I mean, for me, watching the film was very much that kind of universal thing that was coming through of our inner archetypes, our inner parts that we don't integrate into wholeness. That in where the field and the nowhere, the field being the body, the prakriti, the kind of energy manifestation, and the nowhere being the consciousness that knows those parts within one's self, within one's human physical self, and how, so when those parts are not engaged with in a loving way, and sort of released, they become these chained, captive. So and I guess, so now I'm talking to you about it, there's these multi layers, because there's the kind of socio-historical, unintentional socio-historical, cultural meaning that could be discussed, but what you were intending was, obviously with the, but I really found that, and especially the kind of battlefield, the body as this kind of battlefield, that, the inner battles that we wage against ourselves.
Yes, yes. I mean, that is kind of the essence of it. Um, we sort of enslave ourselves a lot of the time, and maybe that has to do with things we didn't choose, like which family we were born into, what religion we may or may not have been born into, and we carry these things around with us for a long, maybe forever, in this body, to some degree or other. And that's the field, and then the knower of the field, to me, is always a great mystery. Um, I'm going to do a painting that probably will be titled something like that, The Field and the Knower, as well, because for my online magazine, Five Doors, I sort of have evolved into doing a theme every month. And then the painting sort of follows that theme as well as everything else. But I'm kind of stumped in a way, because how do you describe the knower of the field? Krishna does it a lot in the Gita, but the knower of the field is almost beyond language to me a lot of the time, and that's where sometimes music comes in. So, like in the end of this movie, when the woman starts singing the high aria type refrain, that to me is like you start to feel the knower. You more than think about the knower, you start to feel the knower, and she's always coming on the horse. She's if that's her, if that's the knower, you can interpret it however you want to.
Yeah, and I love that you made the knower a woman, and a very powerful, embodied person. And actually, I was going to say that about one of my questions, was about the music when that kind of knowing resolution part of the film comes in. It sort of takes, well, it took me on this inward journey, it felt like a spiraling inward, and it was like a kind of redemptive homecoming of like, oh, I am the knower. So that's how, I mean, that was going to be one of my questions, like, how does that description feel to you about the music?
I like how you just said, I am the knower. That is so interesting, because maybe ultimately that's who the knower is, in addition to possibly other entities that are things we don't see but feel and know and experience. And the music makes it emotional for me. I'm even getting emotional right now. It's weird. I hadn't seen this film in a long time, and I watched it, and I cried both times I watched it. For some reason, when she starts to arrive and work with the three characters, the young boy, the young man, and the old man, and me, the middle-aged man, I don't know. It just really it really takes me someplace, and I think music has the power to do that, to take you to places that other things maybe don't have the ability to do, even beyond images. It kind of resonates in your bones, it feels like.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying about sort of knowing the knower, or alluding to the knower, language kind of falls short, and things like music and art can bring us into this more experiential relationship with the knower.
Yes, and she, as maybe the knower, the actor there. I was looking for an actor to play that role, and sometimes I work with non-actors, and then I thought of Michelle, who I have done several theater plays with prior, and I'm like, oh my God, it's her. And she just is so perfect to me when I watch it. I mean, she's
Yeah, I can totally agree. Yeah.
so in it. She's just like it. And it's amazing when somebody can do that, when an actor can just enter that space. We talked about it a little bit, but she just got it right, like right out of the gate, what the character was about, what was going on, the presence. And so, yeah, so it felt like that should definitely be a woman in that role to bring about that change, because so much of what this character's experience is very uh, macho and very, just angry and aggressive. And she's just as strong as all of those things, but she does, the way she goes about it is way more chill.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, watching her, her entrance and the way that she carries herself and the power that she embodies, it reminded me about, so it's like, I mean, so she's obviously one of the main she embodies one of the main themes of the film, which I think speaks to me about this transcendent form of beauty with a capital B, um, which could also be called grace. And it reminded me of this quote, which I'll read, from Plato's Symposium by Diotima, who's the courtesan priestess speaking. And she talks about love, or eros, but love with a capital L. Love is not beautiful or good, nor is it ugly or bad. It is something in between.
Mm.
So it's this kind of
Mm.
this liminal, it's not, love does not inhabit polarities. And that essentially is what, unconditional love, which I know has become more like fluffy, fluffed up, love and light. But actually, it's this really powerful, kind of visceral, difficult space to embody this kind of in between.
Well, yes. And when you were speaking about it not being one thing or the other, she brings uh, death and she brings life in the movie. And so that's kind of Krishna too, like the great destroyer and also the life giver, all in the same being of creative force. And
Mm-hmm.
so it really feels like, during part of it, when she comforts the boy, that gets really emotional for me at that part.
Yeah,
For
for me
some
too,
reason.
that was, yeah.
And but then he's gone. He's gone. And for, even though I created the movie, I still have a reaction to that. And I'd like to know what your reaction was, but I feel like, ooh, oh, what? I was thinking that the comfort would continue, even, as I watch it, but it changes. She lays him to the ground. I'm curious about what your reaction to that moment with the boy was.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was really beautiful and poignant. And, I watched the film a number of times. And that scene got me each time. Um, and, at first it was this, he's dead, he's gone. But, as I kind of dived into the film with subsequent watchings of it, I was, it's, well, first of all, asking about, this death was a kind of release. But then moving even further into that, like I got into the space that I got into with watching this film ultimately was this very non-dual space of, it's not even like the things that are happening. It's like I started watching it again. When you start to talk about non-duality, it's hard to speak about in words because words are all about duality, but I'll try my best. So the man is dragging these three captives behind him, but none of this, to me, with the kind of final watching of this film, none of it was happening as in this is the man and this is the boy and this is the young man and the old man. They're all happening within the man's field, within his psyche. So these characters that he's dragging around are all parts of himself. So when this contact with the Noah happens, and she enters the field, where it's the boy who first perceives her in the kind of distance, and and it's so she's coming. It's this love, this grace, this beauty that comes and gives the boy what he needs, which is comfort, which releases him into whatever his energy can then be really, you know. So it's like, it's this fulfillment of this deep desire that he had, which was comfort in this maternal way, which then released him from his bondage, that he could then, that energy within the man, the protagonist, could then be released to be alchemized into something else.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that about the boy being the one that first sensed her coming. He heard the horse, he heard the music that's associated with her before anybody else did. And that to me is the innocence that like Jesus talks about, blessed are the little children. Um, because there's something happening there with children that we maybe lose as we're trained and we're educated by our parents and our society and other people, and we stop hearing the knower. Sometimes we become maybe like the young man at some point where he's just so angry. He just wants to rip the protagonist's head off. You can see it, and that guy was an incredible actor. Non-actor.
He held that energy really well.
Oh my!
Yeah.
After that movie, I tried to convince him to go pursue acting because he's just so natural and he's got so much energy, Jordan. And but he, but yeah. So the child hearing the horse and then being the first one comforted. Yeah, and I like what you say about that part of the main character that I played. It's essentially part of him being comforted, you know, and being able to be released from that. And I think people do a lot of inner work through the years, inner work with therapists, with counselors, with guides, with mentors, to kind of address some of those things that are way back when, that we have almost subconscious dealings with. And my thought about it is like, you know, I've read different wisdom teachers, including Eckhart Tolle and others, and some of them don't spend a lot of time on the therapeutic process of psychoanalysis with childhood. I don't know if they're against it. Some of them directly are against it, think it's a waste of time. What's your take on that?
So yeah, I mean, I've in the last year I've started doing this work with people one-on-one. I'm not a therapist, but as a teacher and mentor, you know, working from specific different traditions, more from sort of esoteric traditions, and now more recently through somatic work, which is why the whole concept of the field and the knower is very meaningful to me, because the field is literally, even in the Gita, it's, you know, it's the body.
Yes.
So having been in therapy myself, and then you know, resolving lots of childhood things, it got me to a point, and this is the reason why I'm, you know, now I'm learning the whole somatic model, is because when I started approaching my own inner parts that needed that sort of comfort and release and resolution through a somatic lens, the shift was from like talking about those parts to actually connecting with and being with those parts in a very physical way, and having a very physical relationship, literally, you know, in your body. Where so now when certain sensations come up and certain old, you know, oh, that old pain or that old this, or, you know, I know what that is, and it's not trying to intellectualize it, but literally, you know, being the knower who's coming and being the comforter of that wounded child. So yeah, and in terms of sort of teachers who, yeah, I mean, I guess they kind of, you know, specifically you mentioned Eckhart Tolle. I mean, you know, because he sees everything within this space of now. So, you know, I guess their approach is more like, if you can resolve things within this kind of vertical now continuum, then you don't need to do this, which I don't know. But for me, the somatic space has been that, you know, because you're literally in the now, you're in the body, connecting in with. So I mean, yeah. So I guess that's where I place myself on that.
Yeah, well, we are trained so much in our Western educational systems. We're trained in the mind. We're taught that, you know, if you know your multiplication tables as a kid and you get the star, then you figured it out, and you can spell properly, and then you go on through university and everything else, and it's kind of the same thing. It's this track of honoring the intellect constantly, and of course there's value in that. And at some point though, it seems like it only goes so far, and then there almost has to be like a surrender of that part of all of that education and that training that allows another aspect of our being to eventually materialize, I guess you could say. And that concept of surrender is like really sometimes difficult for the Western mind, I think, to just let go. And because, you know, be an entrepreneur, figure things out, make a successful life, and then yet there still can be a lot of emptiness, you know, because we never felt stuff in our bodies, I guess is one way to say it. We haven't had a somatic experience with these things that we know need resolution. So
Yeah.
the healing arts are amazing that way. I personally love hot water, hot springs, and mineral water, and it feels like when I enter that space, things start to loosen. You know, especially out in nature in a really hot spring.
Oh yeah, they're the best. Yeah. Um, yeah. Yeah. What you were talking about with, you know, that kind of surrender, and it's hard for the Western mindset to sort of really lean into that, because it's there's a lot of um, you know, there's so much focus and emphasis on knowing and fixing, and just knowing everything. So to be in a space of beginners, it's the beginner's mind from the Zen perspective,
Right.
of like, just an empty vessel where, yeah, you know all these things, but can you come to a place of surrender into the beginner's mind, where that's when you can really get in touch with the field and come to know the field. And yeah, it's hard to do. Like anyone who has a meditation practice, from the West, is it's not easy to. But then we're not supposed to like just sit and empty. It's like, oh, I'm not very good at meditating because I can't. I'm thinking too much. It's not so much. We're not trying to stop our minds from thinking, but not identifying with the thoughts so that they become this interplay, this dance that's happening within us that we can observe and know and be the space for.
Yeah, you mentioned the word grace a while ago, and I think that that's what I think the character, the woman in the film embodies. That I think you mentioned that, the grace. And when we go through life, we get older, and then eventually we go into old age, and then the old man sort of embodies the potential maybe bitterness that can set in. If you go through a number of heartbreaking experiences in any number of ways, financial, relational, whatever, the challenge is to stay supple, right? and to stay flexible. And when she approaches him, he starts to shake, and then he falls to his knees. And to me, if bitterness and resentment and like all of this can fall to its knees, then maybe grace has won the day.
Yeah.
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 And yeah, when I meditate now, I don't even think about like being a good or a bad meditator. I figure some days I get it and some days I don't. And like it is what it is, Maybe I need to be a little more concentrated on it. Sometimes I think, but I'm just allowing it to over time sort of do its thing as long as I sit, as long as I sit and
Yeah. I mean, it's just coming to that place of, that intentional sitting and being with yourself in whatever conditioned state you happen to be in, your mind happens to be in, and just being in that space of surrender to just being with yourself without any judgment. Um, but yeah, that suppleness that you mentioned, it's because grace is the kind of that we all have access to, if we can lean into the notion that the knower and us are not really, we're just trying to find each other through manifest reality. So when you can lean into that, you can access grace, which has the power to hold all polarities, all meanings. And that brings us back to Diotima's words about love, which is neither good nor evil, but is this kind of, it's this space that can hold everything, which is the knower.
And it's so esoteric, isn't it? It's so sublime. Whenever I start to talk about this or think about it, I'm left with thinking, this doesn't sound scientifically based at all. Like, because I've been trained that my degree's in theology, so I was not a scientist, but I've been immersed in science. You can't help it when you're living in our time. Everything kind of, the new religion is science now, and everything kind of goes through that filter of truth seeking. And so to fall into that space is, we all can feel it, we all can feel it, but then nowadays they call it woo-woo, whoa, you're going into woo-woo land. And sometimes when some of my friends are talking about these things, I feel like, woo-woo, here we go. Because sometimes it feels like people can manipulate the woo-woo to not really deal with something, for instance. They just use it as another form of intellectualization, but it's called woo-woo instead of science. But you're kind of ending up in the same spot where you're not maybe looking at the parts of you that need adjustments or that need to be less selfish, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally, and I that's very much a condition that this kind of intellectual, spiritual bypassing that happens, and I guess the thing that I've learned and keep continuing to sort of just be like, whoa, yeah, each time is like coming back into the body and feeling, just like making, it's like you have this idea that is like, oh yeah, this one idea is going to just solve all of my problems, or this one practice, or this one or this one ideology or whatever, and then you bring it into the body and you see, oh, there's all of these different energies and life forms in play within my body, where this one mono meaning is not going to satisfy this diversity that's going on in my body. So then you're like, oh well, now where am I left? What am I left with here? Like I have to like tend to each of these, and it's like, well, yeah, each it's the diversity that is within us. That's it's like a permaculture garden rather than like a monoculture like cash crop field, where each one is in relationship to the other and in interdependence with each other. And so you can't just take this one thing and go, this is the way,
And we want that as humans. Sometimes we want some security. I mean, the world is an unpredictable, strange place oftentimes, as it is beautiful. And it's like, please give me something that I can just hold on to that will be my go-to. And you're right. Sometimes it just requires some different methods depending on the situation. And I've been personally going through a lot of anxiety lately around a certain thing that I can't really talk about. But when we go through those type of crisis moments, there's a major opportunity to test all of these esoteric belief systems that we have, and what is real at that point, what really works to quell anxiety during extreme duress. And so it's almost like those things are like going into the cocoon, you know, and you don't know if you're going to come out, what you're going to come out as, and there's no necessarily timeline about this is okay. This is when the resolution will happen, and that's when it's the most trying for me anyway. I like to have some timelines. I want to have some
Yeah, we
solutions.
love our timelines, and we love me too. But you know,
You know what
but
I mean?
that's the thing. That's this surrender piece again, surrendering into, it's this paradoxical dance of action and surrender. Like, you can't just constantly live in a, it's the yin and the yang. They have to go together. The negative, and I don't mean negative in a moralizing way, but literally like the negative space and the positive space. We have to like surrender into that, and then we have to act. So it's that, it's like, but we live in a culture and society where it's this kind of projective acting, doing, that needs, I need to just sort myself out, and I don't have time to, fall apart or engage with this or that or the other, and this needs to be sorted out by this timeline. And that's the society that we have to live in. So it's very hard to kind of pull out of that, unhook from that, and just say, well, no, like my internal kind of compass is asking me to surrender into this negative space, and to just be in that with this kind of beginner's mind, and then act from there with what I receive. So it's like the bow and arrow analogy as well. Like, you have to pull back the bow in order for it to fly forward. You can't, it just, so
It can't always be tense. It can't always be tense.
Yeah.
At some point, if you don't loosen that bowstring, it feels like your body will eventually tell you, either your body will get sick, or you'll have hypertension, or some relationship will start to go sideways, or whatever, because the issue is not being addressed. And and that's when you're forced. Maybe some people end up in a hospital bed, and they're looking up at the ceiling, and then there's time to deal with this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
time to
Yeah.
process this. You break a leg, or something else happens, and then all of a sudden, you know, my God, okay, there's no choice. I just ran into a new friend, and when I was up north, and he fell from a two-story
Oh,
building onto the concrete,
my
and
goodness.
lived, shattered his leg, was in the hospital for months, and then did a lot of work in that situation. So the teachers come in various forms.
Yeah. And sometimes in very difficult, hard to deal with situations. And that's the kind of like natural alchemy of a human life. We go through these dissolution phases, and if we've always been avoiding and just doing, then suddenly this kind of tornado comes and rips things apart, where then you have to, and I've had that happen. I've had that happen to people close to me, like really awful things, but which have, changed the trajectory of lives through force. But then if we can like learn to like go towards that in the little ways in our lives, then perhaps it doesn't have to happen in these kind of massive upheavals. Yeah, because it's like my one of my teachers who I do somatic work with, like, he the reason I work with him is because he really approaches it from this inner decolonization lens. And it's always coming back to like, can you relate to obviously what's happening in your body, but what's happening to it around you in the world? Like, can you relate to it and come into a relationship with it, rather than trying to manhandle it into a like the character dragging these parts around, these I'm calling them his inner parts now, because that's what they are to me. Like, because they're a nuisance, and they're an inconvenience, and they're just being dragged around and forced, and and not related to in any way. And that's how
until they pull the rope on him. Until they pull the rope on him, and they
exactly. Yeah, and then he had to stop, and then that in comes that kind of transcendent. So yeah,
for sure. That's so. With the somatic work that you are doing, can you talk about that a little bit in terms of like, is it Reiki? Is it another form?
No, it's another form. I did. I'm qualified as a Reiki master from many years ago, and that had, that was definitely the thing that set me on the kind of spiritual path. Sort of just over 10 years ago now, and that, that's great. It's energy work, and it has many benefits and helps a lot of people through a lot of things. But this work that I'm doing is literally like coming into relationship with, the different sensations in your body, and what, like from and as a way of releasing unresolved energy, also known as trauma. Where like things get stuck, and it can lead to chronic pain, and which I've experienced myself. And so the only way I've come to resolve a lot of, trauma informed, like autoimmune issues and chronic pain, has been through these frames of coming into relationship with parts of myself that I've been dragging around.
So in a practical way, is it like let's say are you lying down on a surface, and then you kind of address the?
No, I mean, you can, but nowadays you can, you can do these things all via Zoom and stuff. And, it's like talking to, speaking to the person that you're working with, and if, whatever kind of, they're going through a specific problem or issue, and trying to locate that, I mean, this is just a very kind of broad outline, locating that in their body, and, through various different practices and techniques, coming into a way of relating to that, usually it's a charge in the body, and how that can be released, or eventually released, or come into relationship with. And so, yeah, and you're literally sort of relating to these different, to your body and the sensations and charges in your body in this very animistic way. So that's where this kind of, it's like, which is again this kind of indigeneity piece, where it's like, everything in the world, including the sensations in your body and the plants outside and the food that you eat, is related to in this very, sentient way, which, to the Western scientific mind is very unscientific. But that's how, indigenous cultures all over the world have this common thread of animism. Within where a person is a person, and their kind of ailments and issues or situations are related to, and also seen as part of a holistic cycle that the person is going through, and not something that needs to be like suppressed or pushed further into the body and denied, which then ends up just going further in, embedding yourself further into your kind of cellular structures, and manifesting in other ways.
And Western science, it does seem, sometimes I'll use the phrase, catches up with some of this type of work. Eventually when things are tested in the lab, in vacuum tests, and then they start to see that meditation actually has benefits in the brain when they can scan the brain, things like that. And so over time, it will be interesting to see how Western science tests some of these healing modalities, if you will, and then proves that they can work. But yeah, I mean, even things like rock shows, it feels like some of the musicians are shamanic. I mean, when Jimi Hendrix was up there playing that guitar, it felt like he was probably rewiring people's nervous systems.
Definitely, yeah.
And allowing them to escape some of the oppressive systems that are kind of subtle, and and when you go there and you experience that, yeah, you can't always describe like a Nick Cave show, and why it feels so good afterwards, and why after the show everybody just sort of hovers together outside with, in Nick Cave fan case, everybody's wearing black and kind of too cool to talk to each other, but want to.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, music definitely has, I mean, music is the biggest art form, I think, that has the capacity to literally like expand and rewire and create capacity in your nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you mentioned the nervous system because like I'm just like going more and more into that the space of kind of what the human or the, you know, our nervous systems mean in terms of like what we can, because, you know, especially with everything that, you know, is going on in the world and continues to go on, we're in this constricted space in our nervous systems pretty much most of the time. And things like beauty, going back to beauty with a capital B, and, you know, this kind of transcendent non-dual love, when we sort of go towards things that are beautiful to us in our subjectively beautiful, that create that on a physiological level, that creates capacity in our nervous systems. And then when, you know, so it's not just like, oh, this is just, you know, this is just a nice thing or a pretty thing or a enjoyable experience. It's actually like physiologically having this very healing, expansive effect on your nervous system, which then with an expanded nervous system, we're able to hold and alchemize and be in relationship with all experience, good and bad, because our nervous systems have the capacity to hold that. So
yeah, to go beyond the thinking of good and bad is, I think, so liberating, and it's not always easy.
no,
You know,
it's the most difficult thing.
yeah, because some things seem like, you know, when you're encountering a difficult situation, you're thinking, this is a not this does not feel good. I don't want to be in this situation. I don't want to be dealing with this person. It seems like you create this like monster. They are bad, I am good, or sometimes even vice versa. I am bad and they are good, and there's guilt and shame and all that. And to enter that other state of grace, yeah, I mean, it feels like the world wants to go there. It feels like all of this tension and all of this stuff that seems to be coming to a head with the virus and other and political disagreements and anger. It feels like things are just pushing to a head. And usually things push to a head because they want to be released and
Exactly.
go on to the next step. Maybe every generation deals with that in one form or another. Maybe it's World War II for one generation, Civil War for another generation. I don't know what our generation is dealing with in particular. It seems like multiple things all at once, and
Yeah.
so many systems are being questioned and brought into consciousness right now. But yeah, it's almost overwhelming
It
sometimes.
is very overwhelming. Yeah. And that's why it's important to create that, you know, to just go back to your film, to bring in that kind of that transcendent energy through whatever way we find it, whether it's through music or art or, you know, just through whatever way that creates expansion and capacity in our nervous system to hold everything that's going on right now,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
not become identified with this or that, or you're
yeah,
wrong and I'm right, you know, because that immediately creates um, this closing up of the heart, the closing up of love that is neither good nor evil, you know. Um,
yeah. She addresses each of the characters, the knower. I guess we're calling her the knower right now, and she addresses each of them, the young boy, the other boy, the older boy, and then the old man, and even then my character, each of them in different ways. She she provides comfort for one. She just stares into the eyes of the old man until he just can't handle it. And to me, it feels like it's maybe love. Just so, how can you resist pure love? You fall to your knees in the presence of pure love. There's nothing else you can do. And then when she comes to the boy, he's got this intense like desire. That's what I see in him. And it's anger, but it also feels like sexual like desire and like unbridled almost. And then she uses that very thing to almost take him and release him. This, you know, this lust. You know, the Gita always talks about fear, anger, and lust. And when I look at the movie, I sort of see those things being embodied in different ways in the characters. And And the thing about it is, I don't know if I can't remember if I directed the actor to do that, but when Jordan fell to the ground after she kissed him, he sort of had this half smile on his face. Like he was released in bliss from the lust. That's how I, imagine it to be. Um, and so yeah, she employs different tools, which I think was what you were sort of alluding to earlier when you said you can't maybe use the same tool every time. You have to use different things to resolve different issues.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where when you go into doing this, inner parts work, somatic work, inner archetypal work, you can't relate to your inner child in the same way that you can't meet the needs and relate to your inner child in the same way that your sort of inner crone or elder would want to be related to. They don't have the same needs and wants, and it's the same way as when you relate to anyone, the people to people, it's like you're not going to speak to your lover in the same way that you speak to your father or your mother or your sister or your brother. It's going to be different. So it's that same way of just coming into a relationship, but it's just we're just up. We live in a culture where it's just like this way up, and everything else that's happening down here, it's like just don't want to think about it. And then
right
there's just we have this huge garden that's waiting for us to, and then when we get on the side of that
mm-hmm.
that part of our being, that field, then there's so much creativity that can emerge from
yeah
that.
I mean, sexual energy, the sexual organs, the chakras down in that region, they are so powerful, and most of the time they seem to only be employed in sex or
Mm-hmm.
or sexual fantasy and things like that. And
It's
so
been fetishized into like that.
right, yes,
that.
right, yeah. This is what this is about, and it more and more I'm fascinated by the ability to channel these things, to channel that kind of like lust energy and desire into creative work, into relationships in ways that is not sexual, but it's just like energetic. And I know that, of course, the whole Indian culture addresses that a lot through tantric practices and things like that. And that's I haven't delved into that a ton, but I'm fascinated to go in and study that more.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, tantra is definitely. I mean, again, it's understood. It's got this very myopic understanding in the West of like this kind of this sexual piece,
Right.
but essentially, it is kind of the kind of Eastern, because there's Tibetan and Hindu tantric practices, but they essentially addressing this process of alchemy, which is holding two polarities of meaning and allowing that circuitry to happen, whether that's sexually or whether that's just in your life, where you're able to hold two poles of meaning in and be present and centered and equanimous and allow that circuitry to happen. And that's, it's like electricity flows in between two poles. And so if we want that life force, that eros, that electricity, we have to hold like the kind of like pole up here, which is all about, the head and the intellectualizing, but even to go beyond that, the spirit and the soul, which is in our bodies, and to hold, that's the circuitry that happens. So without getting too into the tantric alchemical.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a state of grace. You keep on talking about the polarities, and the word that keeps coming to mind in order to like exist in that space is grace seems to like float in the middle between the two,
Mm-hmm.
so that you're not judging yourself for being on one end or the other. But yeah, I'm curious. Did you have any other questions about the film that maybe you didn't address?
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, there was not, there was no real dialogue apart from you narrating that beautiful piece in the end. So yeah, and there was, the only kind of dialogue that there was the, your character sort of shouting in this kind of echoey way, which I found really kind of poignant. Can you talk about like the absence of using dialogue and words in the film in between, between the characters?
Well, when you just mentioned that echoey thing, what that made me feel was that maybe this is all in his head. This is all going on in his head. I don't know. I didn't consciously do that, but now that you say that, I'm like, oh my God, maybe I did that. And the the space that I wanted to get to, and that I always try to get to with the art I do, is kind of beyond, like we talked about, beyond thinking about it, more to experiencing it, just experiencing something. Um, and so the character, you've got the visual, you've got the sounds of the horse that's coming, you've got some wind in there, that's kind of swirling around. Occasionally, you have a rah, aggressive words, and then you just have the music come in, and I feel like in order to transcend a part of the intellect that may be causing the harm, you can't use the intellect to solve it. You have to use a different tool, a different modality. And so that's probably why I paint, and create music and create film and things like that, is I can go in a different way. I can enter, and poetry does that too. So at the end, it's poetic and it's pretty direct, but it also leaves, I think, some room for feeling and sensation, because the great beauty on that day, like you've been saying, the beauty. And well, what is that? What is the great beauty? That leaves it up for the viewer to kind of decide what that really means. And honestly, I'm not even sure what the knower and the beauty mean exactly. It's more like something that I experience. So I think that might address your question.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you saying that, this sense of it, the reason why you maybe omitted dialogue was because of this sense of it all happening in his head, which I can which very much resonates with me, because it's like it's this final resolution of this inner battle that's being waged, that he's waging on himself in his inner parts. And yeah, I was going to ask you, that last piece that you narrate is so beautiful. Did you write that?
Yes.
It's really, really, really lovely. I thought that was gorgeous. I was like, where's that from? So I was going to ask you where it was from. It's wonderful.
Yeah, thanks. It had, like, I was raised Christian. I was very much in the church, and I was raised with the tradition of the Christian Bible and some of the language of that Bible, and some of the poetry in the Bible is just stunning. It's just so beautiful, and unfortunately, sometimes it's lost and manipulated in ways that create things that I don't want to be a part of. But there's also, if you read the Psalms and some of the prophets, if you read some of the Pauline scriptures, it's just the way the language moves has this old world feel, especially if you're reading the King James version. And I think that's so embedded in me. And so from time to time, I'll go visit a Christian church and I'll sit in the back row, and sometimes the minister will use that old language. And it's just like I just start melting into the pew, because it's so in my DNA, it's so much a part of who I am. And they'll kneel down to pray, and everybody kneels down to pray, and the pew is in front of you, and it gets really quiet, and the organ starts playing. And oh my God, it's just, I don't care what's bad about it. There's also a lot of good there. There's just some beauty there that happens, and it happens in all of the religions.
Yeah, definitely.
There's like a sweet spot, and so I try to distill that, and so anyway, with the writing, I think it kind of harkens back to that kind of language that I grew up with.
Yeah, no, that was a beautiful passage. And yeah, I totally agree with you about, the Christian religion, the organized, it has a lot of, I mean, essentially Christ's message is what's being said here as well in the Gita. It's, it's like you say, things get manipulated, and and then we find ourselves in this like good and evil, sin and sinful and angel and devil, and all of these kinds of polarities again, where I think Christ was talking from, again, this very non-dual place.
Yes. Yeah. And especially in the Gnostic Gospels,
Yeah.
like in my last film that I looked at with another co-host, we talked about the Gnostic Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and when I read that, um,
Yeah. I love that.
it's language, but it's poetry, and therefore it's like music to me,
Hmm.
and it basically takes me out of my head and into the other place, and that's where kind of interesting things occur. Other realities, whole other worlds can be created. Uh, I mean, I think that's where art is born from. This film was probably born from that kind of a state of mind. You get into a certain state of mind, and the images start to come. You start to see three characters walking in a field. You start to see a guy with a gun. You see a horse. Like these images start to enter in the subliminal liminal state of like pre-dawn, and then you're there, and then all of a sudden there's a movie. Well, how the hell did that happen? Like,
Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask you about that because I know that a lot of people have, you know, a lot of creative people have a lot of ideas, um, and just, well, this, and I find this a lot with people that I work with one-on-one. They have a lot of ideas and they have a lot of, all this inspiration sort of moving through them, but they are not able to manifest it out into those. So they don't suddenly have a movie or a song or a painting or a poem. So I wanted to ask what your process was with like actually taking that inner world
right.
and making it.
Yeah. Something about materializing the ether feels good to me. I guess I like being in the world.
Well, that's good.
But the thing about it is, I like being in the world, but I prefer to create my own. And so, in order for that to fully be actualized, I feel like it needs to take form and exist.
Mhm.
And so to complete something allows that to happen. And then I get to give it away. I get to give it to people, and sometimes I get remuneration for that, and that feels good too. People buy my songs, or they give me, they say that movie moved me in some way, or whatever form it takes. That's a return gift. Feels like it completed the cycle.
Mhm.
And so if it just stays in my head as a bunch of esoteric ideas that are sort of cool, mm, that doesn't sit with me. That doesn't sit well with me for some reason. And I guess I'm lucky in one sense that I was educated in a Western society because they tell you to finish it, damn it.
Yeah.
Like, so I went to school, I went to college, I graduated, I wanted to get good grades, I got good grades. I wanted to be on the honor roll when I was a kid. I was just motivated to be on the top of the honor roll. I wanted to be on the top of the honor roll. So all of these things have been like a curse and a blessing all at the same time within me. Because sometimes, like this year with Five Doors, the process, to be specific, was every, music, cinema, art, writing, and a ritual had to be released on the first every month. Now, oh my God, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And basically, it caused me a lot of stress. Um, and now I know for 2022, I have to make adjustments
Yeah.
in order to let the process kind of um, be more healthy for me.
Yeah.
Because
And
I,
that's the
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Making adjustments as you create, and like, it doesn't have to be this. Yeah.
yeah. And I also another thing that helps in the process is to have a guide and a coach. I have a coach and a guide, and I meet with her sometimes twice a month if I'm really stressed out, sometimes every week, or maybe it'll go once a month. Usually it's no less than once a month. And so what I do is I write things out that I want to address. And then I notice that on month 4, and I've been doing this for a few years now, I'm addressing the same stuff. So it holds me accountable for my stuff.
Yeah.
And I want to be very honest with myself. I don't want to try to fool my coach
Yeah.
into why I didn't do something. That to me is the stupidest thing I could do. So like I have to be really honest with my guide and tell that person exactly what happened, and if I fell short, why, and let's come up with a new plan and a new angle to finish.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and discipline and discipleship uh, is beautiful. Like here's the thing that liberated me though in the process of all of it. For a long time in the arts, I was striving for material success. I was striving for notoriety and material success. And then
Mm-hmm.
I got to a point where I couldn't take it anymore, to be honest. I know that sounds dramatic, but
No, yeah,
yeah,
it's a lot. It's a lot to just be constantly that
yes,
striving. Yeah,
yes. For basic, and what I realized after a while is I'm striving for affirmation. I'm striving for love. I'm not. I'm. That's at the root of what I'm wanting. I'm wanting to be loved. So if that's the case, then there's a lot of ways to do that. And there's healthy ways and there's unhealthy ways. And the creative process can be liberated if you're doing it, for me now, like I'm exploring ideas. I'm exploring who it is to be JD in this body in this lifetime and what's that about. And art seems like the most um, I don't know how to say it, but like it's the best space for me. So far, it feels at home. I feel most at home in that space. Other people do it through accounting. I swear to God, they do. They just like
yeah,
love numbers, and they find some sort of a meaning and purpose in that. So, yeah, that's kind of part of how the process works for me, I guess.
yeah, and that sort of really resonates with me as well. Everything you just said, um, just kind of coming to that place of wanting to. It's this place of exploration, which and that involves creating and materializing the things that have been percolating inside. It's and without any like, oh, was this a? Because I think a place where a lot of people get stuck, or a lot of people that I work with get stuck, and people that I know is not this fear of like, oh, I've made this thing, but I don't want to release it because it's going to be rejected, or it's going to be not good enough, or it's going, again, it's this fear of it not being, doing it for this external affirmation, and not being able to hold the sensations of it might be rejected, it might be ignored, all of these things might happen.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
no reason to not not create it.
Well, in the Gita, Krishna keeps telling Arjuna, fight. You have to go out into the field and fight. Now, people, argue over that was literal or metaphorical or whatever. Um, but so you sort of have to fight that demon. But one thing that happened to me years ago that helped me kind of flip the switch was I was asked to give a presentation, and I went to give the presentation, and I was so nervous. I was sitting out in my car going over my notes, literally shaking. There's like 200 people in the room, and I'm and then I put on Natalie Merchant, one of my favorite artists, and she was singing from her album Ophelia, and the thought dropped in on me: who is this about? These thoughts that came to you, are they you? Are they inspired? Are you going to this group and standing in front so that everybody can tell you how cool you are at the end? Like, why are you doing this, man? I'm, and then I realized this is not about me. This is not, this is just about letting it come through as best I possibly can. And maybe I'll screw up, and that's okay too. I'm just doing as best I can and letting it come through me so that I sort of try to disappear. If I can disappear, I'm free. you know.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And it's again getting into that beginner's mind state especially when you're like doing something like giving a talk or performing or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and perfectionism is a killer of giving the gift too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and being able to release it and just say, hey, I did what I could do, and I got to give the gift. That's my job. That's my job.
Yeah.
I have,
Yeah.
I don't want to keep these paintings to myself. Like an energy came through me,
Yeah.
and I was going through something. Maybe somebody else was going through something, and when they see this guy reaching with his arm past these rocks, maybe they're gonna like, oh, yep, I felt that. And so
Yeah.
it's my job, whether the painting's good or bad or imperfect or whatever, to share it.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It's like don't hoard your gifts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah. Um, I was going to have a couple questions for you about root and rise, but before that, are there any questions that you needed to get to, and then we can move into that?
Well, I was going to ask you, I mean, we could talk about this for ages, but maybe I just, a question that occurred to me while I was watching the film was, is the medicine of grace the surrender into integration to you in the context of this film?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Like,
Okay.
what integrating in what way?
Of integration of these. So yeah, I guess I was just in my headspace when I was writing the question. This integration of the self with a capital S. So these rejected, abused parts of ourselves. The integration of those parts that we deny and reject about ourselves, is the medicine of grace. Do you think that the medicine of grace is the surrender into this integration?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when my character is on his knees after he drops the chain and he's looking up at the woman. He starts to cry when he looks around, and when he looks around and sees the dead old man, the dead young man. He even touches the middle guy, and then the young boys over there dead. And I think the character is sort of sad in a way. And then the horse comes along and is brought to him, and it feels like it's like redemption, and that could be seen as integration. Like, you get up on this beast, this animal that's full of all of these desires and hopes and things, and you master it. You master the beast. The beast, then the body, the thoughts, they take you, in the case of the words, back to the promised land, the land from which you came, which is maybe going back to that place of innocence and youth that knows things, that knows the knower, that can feel the knower coming. And so I think integration is what we're probably always striving for, is how can we integrate the parts of us that we've ignored, because there's something in desire that can be channeled. There's something in the wisdom of old age that can be used to help the next generation. There's something about the innocence of youth that can be rekindled in us. So absolutely integration, I would say, if I'm answering your question correctly.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all those questions. They were very thoughtful, and a person like you who works in the way you do is able to ask them. So I'm so glad you were with me today for that.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed our conversation.
Wonderful. And so as we close, I want to talk a little bit and have you be able to give a plug about what you're doing with your release December 1st with Root and Rise, like kind of what it's about and what you're hoping to give the world, what you're hoping to receive.
So yeah, it's Root and Rise is my sort of, it's this new offering. It's sort of, it's something that, it's not something that I've been planning for any length of time. It's this thing that sort of came through me, that was like, okay, this is something that I need to do. It's the kind of next iteration of where I want to take, or where this work wants to go. So it's a membership space online. It's going to be online, and we begin on the 1st of December, and it's all open for enrollment now. And we're basically going to be looking at inner alchemical work through myth and through somatic work and through sort of earth-based, nature-based practices. And what the way that I frame it is within this kind of inner decolonization, really coming into relationship with the kind of huge, vast caches of meanings within ourselves. So when I speak of inner decolonization, colonization is essentially the cutting off the relationship with one's like innate story, one's innate mythos. So it's coming back into relationship with that. And so it's going to be, a membership space, a community, where monthly we're going to have sort of monthly practices and teachings related to sort of rooting down and rising up. Or from an alchemical perspective, it's solve, which is like the dissolution, the dissolving of old structures and patterns, and then coagula, which is the creating of new meaningful resonances of meanings and structures from what's been dissolved. So those are what the practices, monthly practices, are going to be related to. And then at each cross quarter of each season, so the first one now will be on winter solstice, we'll work with a myth for that season. And then the subsequent monthly practices will be related to the myth that we work with. Yeah, so it's going to, there's going to be sort of Zoom sessions, teaching sessions, and then there's going to be an online community off Facebook and all of this kind of stuff. So, and my friend, who's an amazing astrologer, is going to be doing a monthly astrocast. She's a really brilliant astrologer, and she looks at things from this very archetypal mythic lens as well. So in a nutshell, that's sort of the bones of it. And my intention behind it is really to sort of create a community that is doing this work intentionally in a container, because I've been doing this work one-on-one with people, and that's great, but I feel that this work really needs to expand into a bigger space, and where people can interact with each other within the context of this work.
Yeah, when you were talking, I was thinking how important it is for us to get together, and to, it seems like when you get together as a group, there's just there's like accountability in one sense, which I think is a positive thing. Accountability can be a very positive thing, and there's just also the meeting of the minds. And I miss church sometimes. Like I don't miss a lot of it, but there's parts of it, and the community part is the biggest part of what I miss about that part of my life that so it's very cool that you're creating a communal space for people to, I assume, on a Zoom call, meet together and
yeah. And if everything's going to be recorded, so if people can't make it, everyone's going to have access to, and sort of as it goes on. So it's a monthly membership. There's sort of initially like a 4-month commitment, just so that you can stick with like one season at least, and then after that you can sort of not be you can cancel your membership whenever and then join back in whenever. But yeah, so it's meant to be the kind of the shape of the container of this is this kind of spiraling cyclical container, because again, it's like we as human, we have our own seasons and cycles, and so to learn to work within those innate seasons and cycles rather than and just coming into relationship with what our cycles are and our seasons are, and going, okay, well, this is currently what I'm going through this kind of dissolution phase, and this is how I can work with it, and then within the context, framing all of this kind of work within the context of a story or a myth, it just really helps to ground it within a bigger resonance of meaning.
For sure. Stories, man. I mean, that's what the whole film, it's a story. Yeah. And it brings it to life. It makes some of the esoteric teachings way more palatable.
And
for most people.
Yeah, exactly. And it just gives context to, it just gives you access to like so much more than just like feeling isolated in your own experience of what you're going through that you think nobody else has ever gone through, and that
Right. Yeah. The commonality of suffering sometimes.
It's the biggest commonality. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, it sounds like a wonderful opportunity for people to get engaged with the community, and at this time, still with a lot of isolation happening, I hope some people will look into your website. Is that RhohiniWalker.com? They can find.
It's on the website. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll post that under this video here, and
thank you.
Look into it there. So thanks again so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the thoughtful questions, and good luck with Root and Rise and everything else.
Thank you. And thank you so much for asking me. This was great.
My pleasure.